Well, welcome back. It's here again, and that is we're about to get another general election in Florida, just a few weeks out, and we're not going to talk so much about where things are right now. We're going to try to project ahead and talk about some of the factors that could influence this election. And John, we're going to start with you. What are the factors that could shift the momentum going forward in the governor's race? Just take a shot at that, and we'll get everybody's input.
Well, there's a lot of things, obviously, at the state or national level that could have an impact on Florida and could change somewhat the dynamic of the race. Governor Scott has banked his campaign pretty much on Florida's economic recovery. If there was a jobs report that showed nationally or within this state that there's a slowdown or a downturn of some kind in the next little bit, that could undercut some of the message that Scott has banked his campaign on. Similarly for Governor Christ is working very hard to try to get a really strong turnout among women voters. The NFL, for example, the domestic violence issue has been one that has percolated for a long period. And that's something that, does that resonate with women voters and other issues?
For me there. Yeah. Make a connection between the NFL and the governor's race in Florida.
Well, I think it really just brings that issue to the forefront, and it makes women voters perhaps think a little bit more about how the establishment has dealt with the domestic violence issue. And arguably, Governor Scott has been, he is emblematic of the establishment in Florida as the governor of the state. And the Republican Party has always had, at least in recent years, has had a very challenging time with women voters. A lot of the policies that they've advanced, equal pay issues, domestic violence issues, and reproductive health issues have all been things that the Republican Party is not well identified with. Democrats are, and that's what Christ is trying to really amplify.
Steve, your reactions are other factors.
Well, if there are two unassailable truths in this race between Rick Scott and Charlie Crist, or close to unassailable, there are these. It's a close race. Every poll has the race pretty much within the margin of error, and the winner is going to be the candidate who does a better job of getting his core base voters to the polls. So, close race and turnout. So anything that affects turnout is a wild card and a game changer. An example would be a poll, a reputable poll that comes out that shows one candidate or the other creating some space between himself and his opponent. A poll comes out and has Rick Scott ahead by 6 points. Could be demoralizing to Democratic voters. A poll that comes out and shows that Charlie Crist has a 6-point lead could, force a number of strategic moves by the Republicans, one of which might backfire. Another factor I'll put on the table is President Obama, who is a problem for Charlie Crist. That's an issue the Republicans have been exploiting in their ground game, talking about, Rick Scott's riff in his campaign speech is something like Charlie Crist is using the Obama playbook to try to get elected governor. And so if something were to happen to further erode President Obama's popularity in the state, it would help Republicans.
Mary Ellen?
Well, I think that this election is going to be different than, as we've increasingly seen, more people are going to be showing up and going to vote earlier, either by absentee ballot or early voting than ever before. And so that all our predictions, when we often say, could it be a game changer in the last 2 weeks, that's going to have less an effect because, as we've found, almost half of the voters in Florida in 2012 went to vote before Election Day. So because of that, I think that it's, before I used to say if we had bad weather on Election Day, that's really going to be bad, especially for the ground game influence. It certainly hurt Alex Sink in Miami when it was a rainy day when she ran in 2010. So I think that things like weather issues will have less of an impact. But I think there are some other dynamics because of this early voting that could affect it. And that is that while the Republicans have done a really good job of kind of pulling back from what they attempted to do, which was to limit the number of early voting days in 2012, which I think had an effect on getting black voters out and really antagonized many of them, saying, if you're trying to take my vote away, I'm going to show up and wait in line even more. If we see something like that happening again, where some supervisor of election decides that we're going to close this polling site, or we're going to make it less accessible, or we have some conflict or challenge, I think that could blow up a little bit. It certainly could anger people. So that's just one.
Jim, one thing that has certainly, or one factor that has characterized the race thus far has been a lot of negative advertising, particularly coming from Scott toward Crist, and presumably that will start happening more with Crist negatively criticizing Scott. What effects has that had on the race, and what will it have on the race and on the behavior of the voters?
I think it's had a big effect on the race in the early stages. You know, Crist's numbers, his positive numbers have gone down significantly. And I think the millions of dollars that the Scott campaign and his allies have spent have really driven down Crist's approval ratings. A big question to me going forward here in the last month and a half of the race is, how effective is Crist advertising going to be, and how much money is he going to have to spend? At this point, we just haven't seen a lot of it, and what we have seen has been sort of the same sorts of ads that Alex Sink ran 4 years ago, which was questioning Scott's character, these sort of grainy ads about when he was with Columbia HCA, and pleading the fifth, and all these sorts of things to try to create questions about his character. But we haven't really seen a lot else at this point. So I think a really interesting thing to watch at this point, going forward, is how effective the Crist ads are going to be, and how many of them are going to be out there. The other big issue, a big question to me from the Crist side of things is, can they get out their voters? They're putting a ton of money into the party to try to get millions to try to set the stage for a get out the vote effort, and we'll have to see how that plays out. I think those are two huge questions for the Crist campaign.
John, there seems to be always an issue or two, sometimes from within Florida politics, or maybe some that are imposed from outside. And we talked about some of them. But do you see a particular issue or two that could really come into the mix here and steer things in the direction of one candidate or the other?
Well, if anything, I think it's the economy, because if things turn anywhere on the economy, I think it's something that Scott has put so much behind that if there's some bad news out there, I think that's something that Crist could raise some doubt about Scott's performance, and that could be an undercutting right there.
If the economy improves, could that also be for Scott?
Yeah, Scott will definitely amplify that, and that's something that he can coast on.
Anybody else want to talk about an issue?
I wanted to mention something, because I think that this election year is fascinating, as every election year in Florida is, but this one in particular, because what you have with the Crist campaign is they're not looking at a big picture message as much as they're really honing in on constituency messages. And that's what Jim referred to a little bit with the ground game. So their idea is to go to the women's groups and say, look at the record of the last 4 years on reproductive health and reproductive issues, as well as going to the gay community and saying, look at the record here on how this administration's fighting against allowing gay marriage in Florida. They're going to the black community and saying, look at the record. And then what they're taking is an effort to bring that message individually to people. They're knocking on doors. And I have to say that the Republicans have learned as well. They are making a big effort to knock on as many millions of homeowners' doors as well. Their message, however, doesn't have that advantage of being as niche focused as the Democrats. So what we have is this message that I think, if you get people motivated based on that message, it could change the dynamic. However, it may not work at all. So that's why this is a fascinating time.
That's why this is an interesting election. Yeah. We'll see. Steve, there's another race that could be interesting. A lot of people believe, maybe wrongly, that George Sheldon really doesn't have a reasonable chance of beating incumbent Pam Bondi for Attorney General. What do you think?
I think Pam Bondi's the clear favorite because she's the incumbent. She has a lot more money, probably much higher name ID. George Sheldon had to get through a Democratic primary, so he spent all his money, and he starts the general election cycle from scratch, where Bondi's been stockpiling money for months. However, you know, one could argue that Pam Bondi's on the wrong side of an important social issue at the moment, and that's same-sex marriage. The public opinion seems to have changed considerably in that issue. You have judges all over the state ruling in favor of same-sex unions. Bondi continues to put forth a very aggressive posture in the courts opposing same-sex marriage, and Sheldon is in favor of same-sex marriage. So again, though, it's a down-ballot race that people are not going to focus on until they walk into the polling place to vote. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, you know, Pam Bondi is the only female candidate on the running statewide on the ballot in either party, and so you've got to give a little bit of benefit to her for that on that point alone.
Except for Chris running mate.
Except running mates.
I think you also have to look at how much resources the Democratic Party is going to put in that race, or whether they're going to put all their eggs in the Chris basket. I mean, you know, if the only way Sheldon has a chance, I think, because he is so far behind in fundraising and name ID, is if the party really comes in behind him. And at this point, I don't think we've seen that. So, you know, again, will the Democratic Party put all their focus on trying to elect Charlie Crist? They aren't even running viable candidates for Agriculture Commissioner and Chief Financial Officer. I mean, they jettisoned those races before they even started. So I think we just need to sort of watch what the party does in that race.
It would seem like Sheldon wins with a incredibly strong Crist performance. If you know, there's sort of a coattail effect. Cabinet races are not anything that many voters have a really good grasp of. And you know, Bondi is a beneficiary of having been on the ballot once before, as is Sheldon. Sheldon has been there before too as a candidate. But it just seems to be something that top of the ticket carries that race.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to break now and come back and talk some more about the 2014 election.